The maxillary process is just going to be this small extension coming from the body right here. We'll see a little bit better view of that here in just a moment. Right there. Now, as we take a look again, we see the frontal process of the zygomatic bone going up to the frontal bone. There is the temporal process, and now we get a good look at that maxillary process. So the borders of that are going to be roughly right here up until this suture. And we'll annotate that with an M for maxillary process of the zygomatic bone. Moving on to the lacrimal bone, the lacrimal sulcus, you'll see sometimes called the lacrimal groove. This is just a groove in the actual bone, and the hole at the very end is called the nasolacrimal canal. So as we take a look, here's our little, in red here is the lacrimal bone. So you can see there's a small little groove right here, which is the lacrimal groove or sulcus. And then this hole at the very bottom here would be the nasolacrimal canal. The ethmoid bone has a few different structures here, but the orbital, or also called the lateral plates, actually form the insides of the eye orbit, so they're the outside portions of the bone. The cribriform plate is what sits in the ethmoidal notch, and it has lots of little holes scattered around there for the olfactory nerves to go through. The crista galli sits on the cribriform plate, and it's just a little ridge. The external nares are the external openings into the nasal cavity. So coming from the outside world, you'll hit the external nares before you get into the nose. And then the perpendicular plate is going to be the top part of the nasal septum, but this actually sticks out the bottom of the ethmoid bone. On the ethmoid, we're also going to see the conchae. And they're just named after where they're located. We have one on the bottom, which is the inferior nasal conchae, one in the middle, which is middle nasal conchae, and then the superior nasal conchae on the top. And what these conchae are doing is they're curved, shaped, and it's going to spin the air to try to slow it down, try to warm it up a little bit, and remove any particles that you don't want going straight into your lungs. And inside the ethmoid bone is where we'll find sinuses and lateral masses. And so they form almost a little bony labyrinth as they go around the inside of the ethmoid bone. Looking at this picture, we see the external nares, again, the opening to the nasal cavity. We also have a good representation of these conchae and their positions. The superior at the top here, middle, and then the inferior nasal conchae. Now looking at an anterior view of this bone here, the cribriform plate is going to be this entire part of the bone here. You can see it has lots of holes in it. So that's the cribriform plate. And then this middle ridge sitting on top of it is the crista galli. We also see on the outsides here, these are those orbital or lateral plates of the bone. We can see middle nasal conchae right here. The superior, you're going to see a little bit better from the back. But the perpendicular plate right here is what forms the top half of the nasal septum. So looking at an anterior view of a fully articulated skeleton here, or skull, sorry, we can see right here, this is the ethmoid bone in green, but specifically the orbital plates or lateral plates of the ethmoid bone. We can see the conchae in blue here is the inferior nasal conchae. There's the middle, and the superior you're not really going to see through the nasal cavity because they're really high and deep in the skull. We can also see the perpendicular plate forming the top half of the nasal septum, and remember the vomer bone formed the bottom half of that. Now in this picture, again, we see those nasal conchae, superior, middle, inferior, but you can also see all these ethmoidal sinuses, which are the actual spaces, and then the lateral masses in between them.